Madam President,
Senator from Illinois.
as consent, the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent there be a period of morning business for debate only until 2 p.m. with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, and with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, and the majority leader will be recognized at 2 p.m.
Without objection.
I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Write this in next time, would you? Madam President,
Senator from Illinois.
I ask the quorum call be suspended,
Without objection.
and I ask that the time that is used in quorum calls during this period of morning business be equally divided between Democrats and Republicans.
Without objection.
I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Again, a quorum call on the floor of the Senate, and as we wait for further debate on temporary government funding, we are just learning that President Obama has invited House Speaker John Boehner to the White House, ostensibly to discuss the way forward on the government shutdown. Speaker Boehner's spokesman, Brendan Buck, is quoted, "We are pleased the President finally recognizes that his refusal to negotiate is indefensible. It's unclear why we'd be having this meeting if it's not meant to be a start to serious talks between the two parties. We are to understand that the meeting is expected to happen this evening at 5:30 Eastern. If any news comes out of that meeting, we will certainly bring that to you on the C-SPAN networks." While we wait for more action here on the Senate floor, a look now at some of your reaction to the government shutdown via social media.
Senator from Tennessee.
I'd like to ask unanimous consent to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
Madam President, we find ourselves in a very predictable situation, and what is unpredictable is what our response to this situation is going to be. For some time, I've talked about the box canyon that we were taking ourselves into, and I think it's now become very apparent to folks on both sides of the aisle that to overturn a central piece of legislation, it takes more than 1/3 of government to do so. And when you have the presiding president over that piece of legislation, it actually takes 2/3 of each of the bodies to make that happen. And I think people have realized that, and that gives me no joy, but this is something obviously that I've talked about for some time, and we find ourselves in this box canyon now that we are in. And what was also very predictable is my friend Tom Coburn, the great senator from Oklahoma, laid out very clearly here on the Senate floor that even if you were to shut down government, the health care bill would continue on. And I think what Americans are waking up and seeing, even though Republicans have strongly opposed the health care bill at every turn, that even with government being shut down, the health care bill is continuing on, and people around the country are signing up for what people call Obamacare. So both of these were very, very predictable outcomes. And now what is unpredictable is what our response to that is going to be. And I'm speaking mostly to the friends that I have on this side of the aisle. There have been a number of people, on the other hand, on the other side of the aisle that have spent a great deal of time over the last 2 or 3 years trying to focus on ways of reducing spending government and making our country stronger in the process. And I think to a person over here, and I think many on the other side of the aisle, understand that our inability to deal with the fiscal situation that we find ourselves in this country has hurt us economically, because people have not been willing to invest in capital investments within their companies and around the world in many cases, because they don't know what's going to happen here in our country. And I know firsthand, being in the position I'm in on the as ranking member on foreign relations, that as I travel the world, no doubt it has affected us around the world, as people are really not understanding whether we're going to be able to meet the obligations that we've made in many ways from a security standpoint. So again, where we are today is very predictable, and I don't want to be crass. I do, obviously know this is creating a hardship for some people that have been furloughed, and certainly affecting people around our country, and that obviously is not a good thing. On the other hand, if there's some way for some good policy outcome here that strengthens our country over the longer haul, which is why we're all here, then that's a good trade-off, and so we'll see what happens. Here's my concern. While the situation that we're in is very predictable, and many people in this body have been predicting we'd end up exactly where we are today in this box canyon, and that people would still be, in spite of the fact that government is shut down, signing up for the new health care law that was attempted to be defunded. What I'm concerned about is this, is we've made great strides as a nation. We've made great strides in this body to reduce government outlays that we have control over. This hasn't happened in this nation since 1955 and 1956. 2 years ago, we were at $1.043 trillion in annual outlays from a discretionary standpoint, and that's what we deal with in a CR. Last year, we were at $988, and this year, if we continue to uphold the law that we all put in place, we're going to be at $967 billion. That is a phenomenal thing for us to have achieved in this body, and for our country to have achieved to strengthen our nation. And while there may be ways of changing the way those outlays are done, and maybe there's mandatory spending that's substituted for discretionary spending, and maybe there's ways of doing it that make it more sensible to many people in this body, what we have done is truly remarkable. It truly is remarkable that Washington figured out a way to reduce the amount of spending that was taking place. And again, I know that we can figure out a way to do that even smarter. But let me get to the unpredictable point. Sometimes when people find themselves in a box canyon or in a place that is difficult, people begin doing things that are not in the interest of themselves, and certainly not in the interest of the body that they represent. And what I'm worried about is that while so many people have been focused on this shiny thing over here, and so much of the nation's focus has been on this shiny thing over here, what people have not been focused on in the way that I would hope is the gains that we've made in controlling spending as a nation. And what I worry about as we now begin to, it looks like, combine the continuing resolution process with the debt ceiling, is I'm beginning to be very concerned that people forget about the tremendous gains that we've made in strengthening this nation. And while I'm saying this to an empty chamber, like most of us do when we come to speak to the Senate floor, and I understand that, I know people are busy and have other things to do, my talk today is really focused on people in the other chamber. I know there's a lot that's happening over there, and what I'm worried about is as the leadership over there tries to cobble together 218 votes to maybe do something relative to the continuing resolution and at the same time do something relative to the debt ceiling, that somehow or another, because we're in this box canyon that was very predictable, they deal away the very gains that have been gotten. And so what I hope that we will do on this side, and to all of those, and there are many on the other side that have fought so hard to try to get the momentum going so that we will save our country from huge deficits down the road and do what we can do to make sure that we leave this country a better place for young people like these interns that are here on the floor in pages. What I hope we will do is keep our eye focused on the fact that whenever negotiations take place around a debt ceiling, they traditionally and always have been about making sure that we're trying to do those things to keep us from having more debt down the road, and that we will keep our eyes focused on the reforms that are necessary to keep that process going. To be candid, this is the first time I've said this publicly, but to look at a continuing resolution at $988 billion, I'm sorry. The law says, as it now is, that we would be spending beginning a couple of days ago in this new year's at $967 billion. And I know that the discussions here on the floor have been, well, in 6 weeks, the sequester, by the way, is that mechanism that was put in place during the Budget Control Act to continue to put downward pressure on spending. The sequester will kick in 6 weeks according to all the discussions that have taken place. But I think most of us who have fought hard to try to save our nation from these mounting deficits down the road, candidly, we're a little disappointed that we'd even be looking at extending last year's spending for 6 weeks and really not taking ourselves down to 967. And I realize, what has happened. But here's my point to the other side of the building, the House. Whatever you do, please, whatever you have to do to cobble together 218 votes to pass a bill over there relative to maybe the CR and the debt ceiling, please do not negotiate away the hard-won gains that we were able to put in place to reduce spending and to help make our country stronger for the people, for young people like those sitting in front of me. That is my message. We're in a place that is very predictable. The outcome is unpredictable. But what I hope the outcome will be is an outcome that causes us not only to not deal away the gains that have been put in place, but to maybe put in place, and I hope, mandatory reforms that we all know need to occur to make this country stronger. There's tremendous bipartisan support. The President's budget, the President himself in April laid out a budget that had numbers of mandatory reforms that he was in agreement with. And so what I hope will happen is we will keep the discretionary levels at levels we've already agreed to, and we'll take up some of those mandatory reforms that the President himself has already said he thinks are in the interest of our nation, and use those to help us raise the debt ceiling, and in the process have an outcome that causes this country to be stronger, causes this economy to grow, and causes us over time to continue to be able to honor the commitments that we've made around the world. And with that, Madam President, I notice the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Well, work continues behind the scenes on an
Senator from
answer
Kansas.
to the
Madam
shutdown.
President, thank you very much. I would ask the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Madam President, I had a great honor this morning, and it will change the nature of the remarks I intended to make on the Senate floor this morning, but I just returned from the World War II Memorial. We have a group of 90 World War II veterans on an Honor Air flight. Honor Air is a program, a national program in which funds are raised by friends and neighbors and community individuals to help bring their World War II veterans to the nation's capital. I've probably visited the World War II Memorial dozens of times, maybe 40, 50. Every time there's an Honor Air flight from my home state and I'm in Washington, D.C., I want to be there to say thank you, welcome. It's an honor to have you at the memorial that was built for you. You know, I visited the World War II Memorial. It's especially meaningful to me personally. My dad is a World War II veteran. My dad's been on an Honor Air flight. He was the oldest veteran on that flight at age 93. My dad will now be 98 in November. And just a few days before the World War II Memorial opened, I walked down there. I was a House member then, not a senator, and I walked down to the memorial and got a glimpse of what it was going to be like. It's a wonderful place, and then it reminds us of many things. That day, I stepped away from the memorial and used my cell phone to call my dad at home in Plainville, Kansas, and I was fortunate. I got the answering machine, because these are difficult things to tell your parents. Dad, I'm at the World War II Memorial. Thank you for your service to our country. I respect you and I love you. And it was great to be able to say that to an answering machine instead of to your own parent. My dad actually went up to me a few moments later. My cell phone rings, and it's my dad, and says, "Gerald, I couldn't understand what you said." And so I repeated it in person, and it's a great thing about that memorial, in which it causes us to reflect and to say things and to express ourselves in ways that we otherwise would never do. And so that memorial, like others that honor our servicemen and women, is one that calls us to say, we thank you for your service, we respect you, we love you. And that's the experience again this morning. Again, I try to be there every time that a group of veterans come from Kansas, and I was hoping today wouldn't be any different. With the shutdown of our government, with the funding for the national parks, there was some concern about whether or not these veterans would be able to actually get to the memorial. And it all worked fine, and I appreciate the way that the morning's events transpired, and there was no confrontation, and no one wanted to deny those veterans that chance to visit that memorial for their first time. In addition to those sentiments about these individual veterans, I think what may be of value as we approach today and tomorrow and try to find the solutions that are necessary to solve the circumstance we find ourselves in, is a recognition that our veterans, and I've had this thought every time I've walked to the Vietnam Wall or to the Korean War Memorial or now to this newer memorial, the World War II Memorial. Not a single person represented on that wall or memorialized in the World War II Memorial, the Korean War Memorial, not one of them. I just can't imagine a single one of them volunteered or was drafted for purposes of a fight between Republicans and Democrats. No one went to serve our country. No one volunteered to serve our country because they believed in Republicans or they believed in Democrats. My view, knowing veterans as I do, is they answered the call to duty. They were willing to serve because they believed in America. They believed in what the United States and our principles and the freedoms and liberties that it provides. And they knew that their service would make a difference in the lives of their kids and grandkids. They knew that this would help make America a better place for everyone, but certainly for people that they knew, their family members. And I hope that I can portray to my colleagues here in the Senate and here in this Capitol building and down Pennsylvania Avenue that the battles we engage in need to be a lot less about Republicans and Democrats and much more about what's good for the country. We ought to use the veterans that we met with this morning and those that are memorialized on the National Mall in every circumstance to remind ourselves that there is a higher calling to what we do in our nation's capital. There is something more important than the political skirmishes. I don't say this in any Pollyanna way. I don't say this in any way that suggests that there aren't partisan differences. I've always assumed, believed, that Americans send a variety of people to Washington, D.C. to represent their interests. And my state of Kansas will probably send somebody different than some other state. And we all come here with a philosophy, a background, the way we grew up, the way we think about things, the instructions our constituents have given us. And all of that is to reflect in the way that we vote, the issues we pursue, the priorities that we have. So it's not that we're all supposed to agree, but surely there ought to be a recognition that when there's disagreement, as there often is, there is a desire, just as our servicemen and women had, to serve the country, much more important than the desire to serve our political party. So today's trip to the World War II Memorial, while it is a common experience for me, today was especially useful and meaningful at a time when these veterans came not knowing whether or not they would be able to gain entry to the memorial, to be there to encourage them and to see that they were welcomed and greeted. But perhaps as equally important is to make sure that what we do, as a reminder to me as to what we do in the United States Senate, is motivated by the best of intentions and the greatest of goals. The idea that America is a special place and that we who serve here have a special responsibility. And we have a chance to try to do something good for the country. One of the things that has always inspired me, pleased me about Kansans, and I assume it's true elsewhere, most of the conversations I have with folks back home, a lot less about what they want me to do for them, but more about what decisions they want me to make certain that their kids and grandkids have a better life. It's something very great about how we have an interest as human beings, as parents, in the well-being of the next generation and not just the well-being of ourselves. And so my efforts in trying to find resolution to the circumstance we find ourselves in is strengthened. The resolve I have to try to work with others here in the United States Senate is one that is highlighted by my experience this morning on the National Mall. I think about, where we are and where we need to go, and it's, again, having decried the high partisanship nature of this place, I don't want to detract from that, but we need to be able to have leaders who are willing to have discussions, conversations, and a coming together. It's true of Republicans, and it's true of Democrats, and it's certainly true of whoever is the President of the United States. We need to make certain that we have the ability to recognize that not all of us agree on everything, but with the efforts that we make to find a solution to a problem, there is a coming together. And it seems to me we've now gotten ourselves in this entrenched position. And while I was pleased moments ago to learn that our President has called congressional leaders to the White House, it's disturbing to me that the message is, but we're not negotiating. I'm not certain what the purpose of the White House visit will be. I hope it results in movement, in success. And it's my understanding that my colleagues on the Democrat side of the aisle have agreed this morning to, quote, not negotiate. All I know about that is what I read in the press. And I don't, again, in an attempt to make certain that this doesn't sound partisan and detract from what I was attempting to convey moments ago, we need to make certain that Republicans understand that we can make progress in the positions that we hold even without getting everything we want. And so this experience of being a United States Senator, the great deliberative body, hasn't been my experience in the short time that I've been a member of the United States Senate. And the idea that we can't negotiate just seems to me to be contrary to the purpose of this historic body. So I hope that the attitude and approach changes, that every senator recognizes that it's not an all or nothing proposition. It's an opportunity for us to resolve differences, and each find some satisfaction in moving in the direction or preserving the status quo, if that's your position, that because America is a diverse place and that people care differently about different issues and have different opinions, we certainly have a responsibility to represent those views of the folks back home, but recognizing that the country doesn't always agree with us. Surely there is that common ground, that opportunity to find solutions. And so my call is for leadership, to say, and leadership I mean broadly, all 100 of us, not leadership in the position of somebody who occupies a position of leadership beyond being a member of the United States Senate, but all of us to demonstrate the leadership to find the necessary resolve to solve our country's problems. The Affordable Care Act is a very controversial piece of legislation. It's been said here on the Senate floor, it's the law. It's not negotiable. It doesn't make sense to me that that's the position. In fact, the President has delayed, excluded, found exemptions for what's the law. So surely if the President can, for example, delay the implementation of the employer mandate, it's not without the realm, in fact, I would say it's within the constitutional responsibility of Congress to have the debate, discussion, and consideration of whether to delay the individual mandate. It's the law of the land, but if the President can make changes in the law of the land, surely the body created by Article 1, the legislative branch, has that opportunity to do as well. So it ought not be non-negotiable. It's time for the Senate to function. It's time for us as individual senators to provide the leadership to resolve our problems. And, Madam President, in my view, we desperately need leadership from a president. And while I have serious policy and philosophical disagreements with President Obama, my greatest complaint about his presidency is his lack of leadership. We need somebody to rally us, to come together and find solutions to those problems, to better resolve our differences. And again, I don't want to detract from the observations about how partisan this place has become by talking about President Obama. In this case, he is a Democrat and I'm a Republican. But regardless of who is the occupant of the White House, in order for the Congress to resolve difficult issues, it takes the leadership of a president. And so my call, as it was earlier, to my colleagues in the Senate to provide leadership, I hope the President will, in his meeting with the leadership of the Senate and House today, will provide the leadership necessary to help us move in the direction and step back from the statement that while we're meeting, nothing is negotiable. Madam President, I appreciate the opportunity to address the Senate, and I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from West Virginia.
Thank you. First, I want to apologize to the people of West Virginia. I'm embarrassed and ashamed as a United States member of Congress how we are acting. I've been up answering phones in my office. They're upset, and I said, well, you're not as upset as I am. I've got a front row seat, and it's not pretty. This is not what we were sent here to do. It's not what I signed up for. It's not what I asked the people in West Virginia to allow me to represent what I consider the greatest state in the nation. And I'm sure each one of us feel the same way about our states and the wonderful people. I've always looked at public service as an opportunity to fix problems, to make life better, to be able to use the wisdom and skills that we receive through just our experiences in life and watching people and the compassion we have for people to try to make it better. Shutting down government is simply unacceptable. I don't care any way you look at this. It's just unacceptable. This is the first time in 17 years, Madam President, that our government is not open for business. First time in 17 years that we're not open. This is self-inflicted. This didn't happen by any outside forces. This has all been self-inflicted. It not only hurts the people of West Virginia deeply, it hurts people all over this country. And they're feeling the effects. This is only the second day, but it's 2 days too long. Most of you know I'm pretty moderate. I'm very conservative on fiscal issues. It's just how we were raised. We were expected to pay our bills, to take care of our debts, and to take care of ourselves and our family. So I watched that very carefully. When I became governor, the first thing I did was trying to put the financial house in order in West Virginia so that basically I could take care of our values. And that was our priorities based on who we wanted, our children to have an opportunity. We never cut any services during the recession. We took care of our seniors with the dignity and respect and pride that they should have. We took care of our veterans. We just couldn't be everything to everybody, but we really watched our dollars and got our financial house in order. So I look at it from that standpoint where I come from as a proud West Virginia Democrat. But also, I'm very compassionate on social issues. I really believe, watching my grandparents and watching my family in the little town of Farmington, West Virginia, where I grew up, people expected you to do things. They expect you to really chip in and help people. But they expect you to help yourself also. And they expect you to take care of those who couldn't, less fortunate. And I've always taken that with me in every aspect of public service. I think I'm reasonable and willing to compromise and work with anybody on any issue. I've always put my state's interest ahead of my party politics. I don't make any excuses. I really believe that I'm absolutely a privileged person to be living in the greatest country on earth and being a member of a great family in a great state of West Virginia. But I'm an American, I'm a West Virginian, and then I'm a Democrat from West Virginia. And I have dear, dear friends who are Republicans from West Virginia and from all over the country. So when I looked at the cause of this problem that we have right now, it was about finances, strictly about finances. Can we continue to pay? I looked at also the way that I thought the Democrats truly looked at this, and they said, fine, we'll agree to the 986 number, $986 billion. That was the Republicans' request to keep the spending level. The Democrats would have loved to have the $1.058 trillion, so they reduced it $90 billion. To me, that was a good compromise. We can live within that 986. We got to tighten our belts a little bit, but we're good at that in West Virginia, and we did it. And then all of a sudden, the Affordable Health Care Act, or the Obamacare, as people have referred to it, becomes the issue. There's a lot of things in that piece of legislation that I don't agree with. I don't know how I would have voted if I was here. I would have tried to make what I would have thought constructive changes. But you know what? It's the law. And I said, I'm in a mode that I would call a reform, repair, and then repeal parts that we can't fix. I don't know that yet. We've got to get in there and do it. Now, I'm probably part of the problem and caused some of this because I made a statement. We were talking to some people, and they were asking me, what do you think is going to happen? I said, well, for my colleagues and friends on the other side of the aisle, my Republican friends, I would think that they would look and if they really want to talk about health care, can it be extended for 1 year before it takes the effect of the law? I didn't mean to postpone it. I didn't mean to stop it and don't start until next year. I meant the fines and the penalties. Think about this. I'm very much opposed to the individual mandate, but I understand it's part of the process. But I would have thought, why won't we have a transition year? So the law takes effect as of yesterday. It has. We've got people trying to find the best opportunity they have. In my little state, we don't have a lot of options. So I want to make sure that the people that have good insurance are able somehow to keep that. There's got to be a way we can work through that. I want to make sure the people that have no insurance and have never been able to buy insurance can now be able to afford it. I want to make sure of that. I want to make sure that people that had pre-existing conditions or they had a child that was born with a condition are able to keep the insurance that they now have that they couldn't have before. I want to make sure that basically the senior citizens in West Virginia that basically are going to fill the donut hole they have to out of their pocket they couldn't afford is taken care of. They can go get an exam on an annual basis and not have to pay a copayment from their Medicare. Those are all good things, and I know that my good friends on the Republican side feel the same way about some of this. Why would you want to throw the baby out with the bathwater when all you have to do is maybe change the water every now and then, and we have a little clean water we can bathe the baby again in? These are the sensible solutions, and where I was raised, looking at how do you fix it. I can assure you of this. I've never fixed a problem by calling somebody else a name. I've never chastised somebody for their beliefs. I really haven't. I've tried to think of, okay, if I was in their shoes, how could we fix this? And when I was governor, I used to sit down with people on the opposite side, and I'm thinking, okay, in the profession that we're in, public service, how do I allow them to go home to save face? How do I allow them to have some comfort, that they're able to bring constructive ideas to the table that basically makes it better? I've always thought of that. So you're not going to hear me saying that we're right and they're wrong. In this case here, I will say that please don't have this self-inflicted pain on the people of my state of West Virginia or your state or this country. There could be a time when we're not able to stop what might be happening. The market forces might push us in a direction that we can't control. This is something we can control, and all we're asking for, please, let government continue. If you want to talk about a big, grand plan, which I hope we do, which is fixing the financial condition, getting our financial house in order. I've been a big supporter of Bowles-Simpson. It's the only bipartisan package that's been on the table since I've been here. There's an awful lot of things that people say, well, I don't like this, I don't like that. None of them have said that it's not what needs to be done. It's a three-pronged approach. That's the big fix we've talked about. But we're not talking about any of that. We're talking about things we don't like. We're talking about people we don't like. We're calling people names. And it just doesn't fix things. It doesn't make it right. So you will hear me continue to talk about the grand bargain. This is a time between now and the debt ceiling. And I will say this about the debt ceiling. Raising the debt doesn't fix the debt. Continue to raise the debt. We need to have a path to fix it. We shouldn't be going through this political fight every 3-6 months. This is the 5th time that I've been in a debt ceiling. How many times have we voted on the so-called health care, Obamacare? It's ridiculous to continue to fight the same fight over and over. I would hope that we are in a reform, a repair, and then repeal when you can't fix. When you've given it your all for the betterment of our country, and it's just not fixable or doable, then you change. We haven't gotten there yet. We got all naysayers and people just that basically that just don't want change. I've got too many people that need the services of government. I've got too many people that depend on it. And not that I believe that they shouldn't be dependent. I would hope that people would be independent. But government's so intertwined in all of our lives. And to just say you want to stop it all is wrong. And so I would ask my dear friends and my colleagues on the Republican side to please think about a continuing resolution. Please, we've come to the agreement on the number that you wanted of 986. Health care, if you wanted to bring up the Keystone Pipeline, I'm a total supporter of Keystone Pipeline for energy independence. I'm an all-in energy person. Use whatever we have. It's not the place for it. As much as I would like to see it, it's not the place for me to draw the line to inflict so much pain on so many Americans, so many West Virginians, just because of one issue I like or don't like. There's a time for that. There'll be a time for this health care bill, the Obamacare. It'll either succeed or fail on its own. But we ought to try to make it better if we can. If we can't, then come to the conclusion we can't. But don't shut down government because you don't think it'll work. Or maybe you're afraid it will work. That could be it too. So with all that being said, I'd say to my friends, you'll never hear me say anything derogatory about you. You can always reach across the aisle to me. I'm always going to sit down and talk to you. I'm willing to compromise and work on any issue that betters the position that we have, that betters the quality of life, that creates opportunities, that makes us the strongest and most powerful nation on earth. And I will continue to fight for that, but I'm asking you for this time, don't allow this self-inflicted pain to continue. This is not fair to my state, It's not fair to the people in West Virginia. It's not fair to your state of Wisconsin, Madam President, or to anybody in this great country of ours. For that, I say thank you for allowing me to say what has been on my mind. I'm a proud American, and it's about this country first, and it's always going to be about this country first. If the United States of America does well, I'll guarantee you the great state of West Virginia is going to be just great. We're going to do fine. But we've got to work together and put our priorities in place. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Pennsylvania.
Madam President, first I have 4 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to, first I want to commend the words of my colleague from West Virginia about, first of all, the frustration that so many Americans feel that we share, and also his words about trying to come to a resolution. I think it bears repeating, and the main purpose of my remarks today will be focused on really on one central theme, and that's that in the House right now, Speaker Boehner could put a bill on the floor that would open the government up after a House vote. I'm holding here the bill that would do that. This is the bill that passed on Friday. It's an amendment to Amendment 1974 to House Joint Resolution 59. This is the bill that if the Speaker were to put this on the floor, it would pass overwhelmingly. But you'd get not just one side of the aisle, it would be a bipartisan vote to pass that bill. And upon passage, and then of course getting the bill to the President for signature, so within however long it takes for the House to complete a vote, a rule, and maybe 2 votes, and then get it to the President, this could be over, and it should be over. We should open up the government. This is the way to do it. A bill that doesn't have anything attached to it, it just funds the government. So I would hope that the Speaker, at long last, would put that bill on the floor, and we're hearing voices that are bipartisan today asking for the Speaker to do just that. We've also heard a lot of talk about negotiation and compromise, and that's good that people are talking about that. But I hope that some of our Republican friends talk about it with a degree of faithfulness to the facts, or adherence to the facts about what has happened over the last couple of months. In an effort to reach an agreement that would avoid the shutdown, going back now a number of weeks and even months, Democrats here in the Senate and the House as well accepted some of the very difficult so-called sequestration cuts. What do I mean by that? I mean the across-the-board indiscriminate cuts that went into effect in 2013 and were unfortunately a carryover from a battle and a fight in the summer of 2011. So we've accepted those difficult cuts in this budget negotiation when the so-called continuing resolution, meaning the bill that would keep the government operating, the one I just held up, as a compromise. And this happened a while back. I mentioned that last Friday, September 27th, the Senate passed the so-called clean continuing resolution, which is just a fancy way of saying a budget bill without add-ons, nothing about any other issue, just a bill to fund the government. That bill, the one I referred to earlier, that passed the Senate on the 27th and is sitting over in the House, would open the government up and continue funding for the government until the middle of November. So we get past this crisis. We don't have this as a problem in the next debate about paying our bills, and we can have a big debate in November about making sure that we can pay for government operations. What we should do as well, as we're debating in November, we hope we can get there, but as we're debating that, we should figure out a way, and I think this is a bipartisan concern, to shut off, to turn off, at least for 2 years, the across-the-board cuts that I think both parties have real disagreement with. So but the key is passing this in the House, this measure that will end the crisis, open up the government. When we passed it here in the Senate, we accepted those levels of spending which are significantly less than Democrats would have hoped for and would have wanted. Despite the fact we accepted these, despite the fact that we reversed the sequester in the budget we passed this spring. So we had a long budget debate here, and some might remember last spring, voted well into the early morning hours. I think our last vote was at 4 or 5 in the morning. But that was a higher number than what we've agreed to already. So Democrats have compromised substantially already on the spending level. And that doesn't seem to get reported very often. The bill that passed the Senate last Friday is a $70 billion cut from the last fiscal year, 2013. The levels that were enacted, the spending levels enacted in fiscal year 2013 before the across-the-board cuts went into effect. So just to restate, this legislation, which is in the House right now, and they could pass with overwhelming bipartisan support and would open up the government and end this crisis. They could do it this afternoon. They could do it this evening. They could do it without a lot of trouble. If they put this bill on the floor. It doesn't mean that all Republicans have to vote for it. The Speaker himself could vote against it. But just putting it on the floor and having an up or down vote, I think, would be good for everyone. It would end this crisis. It would open up the government. And then we could begin to work on what I think the American people hope we're working on. They expect us to keep the government open. That's fundamental. But I think they expect us as well to work on strategies to create jobs, or at least put into effect strategies that will lead to job creation. But I'll say it again, this bill that is sitting in the House is not just a bill that will open up the government and will have overwhelming bipartisan support. This bill is $70 billion less than what we wanted. Now, to say that's a compromise is an understatement. So on the main issue before us, how do you fund the government? How much, in terms of dollars, do you direct towards the operations of the government? We've already compromised a long time ago to reduce that number by $70 billion. So when our friends are saying that Democrats are not negotiating or compromising, my goodness, we compromised on day one. They prevailed in that debate. We decided that it's better to compromise in that number and keep the government operating and move the process along in terms of the budget rather than shutting the government down to get our way. Some Democrats might have said to us, you know what, you should have taken this farther and not accepted those cuts, and maybe even take it as far as some Republicans want to take the debate on health care to shut the government down. We said that doesn't make any sense. It's bad for the economy, it's bad for vulnerable people, it's bad for national security, and a whole host of other reasons, which I'll mention and itemize, to shut down the government. So from the beginning, we were not only willing to compromise and negotiate, we've already done it in a very substantial way on the core issue, which is the budget and the number, okay? So for them to say, well, we're not going to insist that the government stay open, and then they want to have some negotiation about that, doesn't make a lot of sense, does it, when you consider the compromise that we've already made. So I think the fundamental thing the American people want us to do is open the government. And the key to opening the government is not only sitting in the House, the key is already in the lock. All the Speaker has to do is turn it, ever so slightly, to turn that key, and the turning of the key is this bill. If this bill goes on the floor of the House of Representatives today, tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon, tonight, whenever, it will pass with overwhelming bipartisan support. So I'll come back to that in a moment, but I think the question of compromise is, frankly, weighted to our side. I think we've made already a substantial and significant compromise in any negotiation, and that was done a long time ago. I think at this point, when it comes to the question of what the House, some members of the House have tried to do to bring us to this point where there's a shutdown, I think their actions are, in a word, irresponsible, and I think a lot of Americans expect that that they would act in a more responsible manner. By pushing an agenda that has now led to a government shutdown, is, in addition to being irresponsible or a dereliction of their duty, it's also reckless. This is a reckless step to take just to make a point about health care, about anything else. There are a lot of us, we'd all like to have our arguments litigated or debated in a way that has a lot of attention paid to it. But to take it this far, where you're literally willing to take an action which leads, as this has done, leads to a government shutdown, is both irresponsible and reckless. So I think we're just beginning now, in the hours, and now unfortunately we're into the second day of this, we're just beginning to understand the impact that this is having on Americans, but in the case of Pennsylvania, we're just beginning to hear the impact on individual Pennsylvanians. Let me give you an example of that. This morning I learned that Bushkill Outreach, a food pantry located in the Delaware Water Gap recreational area, is closed because it is on federal land operated by the National Park Service. So when you close a national park area or a national park itself, you're not just impacting what happens there and for the opportunity for people to tour a national park or to recreate, you're actually having an adverse impact, in this case, on a food pantry. This particular food pantry, Bushkill Outreach, feeds 30 families per day, amounting to 120 people per day and 1,200 people per month. But just imagine that. You have a group of members of Congress in Washington that believe that their ideological point of view on one issue is so compelling and so important to the country that they're willing to shut the government down and deny those 30 families the opportunity to have the benefit of a food pantry in a still tough economy. We've had, fortunately, a lot of job growth over the last several years, and we're happy about that. We're happy that the economy is moving in the right direction on job growth. But it's not moving fast enough for Pennsylvania in this sense. We have hovered around 500,000 people out of work for far too long. It was well above 500,000 people. Fortunately, it came down below 500,000, but it's begun to creep up again. And once again, Pennsylvania has an unemployment number which is just at about, I think it's 501,000 people. In my home area of northeastern Pennsylvania, we just saw data today. Unfortunately, in my home county, Lackawanna County, in the county next door, Luzerne County, and at least one other county, if not two more, in that region of the state, including the region near where Bushkill Outreach is, the unemployment rate in several of those counties is more than 9%. So a food pantry is not just a place for people that are particularly vulnerable. These are people that have been vulnerable because of job loss, because of the economy. The shutdown has two adverse impacts on those families. It has a direct impact on their ability to access food every day. That's horrific enough. Talk about direct and substantial pain, physical pain, on an individual or a family. But it also has another impact. When they shut the government down, and certainly over a long period of time, you for sure, and this is irrefutable, you injure the national economy. When you injure the national economy, you make it less likely that those people that have to access the food bank can actually get a job in northeastern Pennsylvania, where I live, or anywhere else in the country. So this is about real life. This isn't some Washington theoretical debate. So there are thousands of reasons to open up the government and to say to the Speaker in the House, get this bill on the floor and the food pantry won't be adversely impacted. Our national security will no longer be adversely impacted if we can open the government up again. So folks that access this food bank are a lot of them are on fixed incomes. So it has a especially detrimental effect on them. How about national security? The shutdown is having a direct and substantial impact on national security. Our colleague, Senator Feinstein, was on the floor yesterday, spoke of the critical support that the shutdown, or I should say the critical impact that the shutdown is having on the intelligence community. As many Americans know, the intelligence gathering isn't just the CIA. It's a whole range of agencies that gather intelligence, which arms us with information to protect ourselves and to be able to protect ourselves from terrorist strikes. In the intelligence community, meaning all of the federal agencies that gather intelligence to protect us, 72% of the civilian workforce is furloughed. It's really hard to comprehend the adverse impact of that. This means that the bulk of federal employees who gather critical intelligence and work with law enforcement agencies are not working during the shutdown. You've got to ask yourself at this point, if you are a member of the House or the Senate who believed that your point that you wanted to make on health care or anything else that has led to this shutdown, do you really want to maintain that position, that your point is so important and so compelling that you're willing to allow a shutdown to take place and then continue and allow this number that I just read, 72% of the civilian workforce in the intelligence community is furloughed. It puts at risk our soldiers, our fighting men and women who are on battlefields around the world or in danger zones. It puts at risk our diplomatic personnel. And it, at some level, at some point in time, puts Americans at risk because you cannot stop terrorism. You cannot arm yourself against terrorist attacks unless you have information. And you don't get the information unless you have the full measure of intelligence gathering. So I would hope that folks would ask themselves, is my ideological point of view on this or that issue important enough that we should have a government shutdown in place which injures our ability to gather intelligence for national security? I just hope that people would ask themselves that question and see what the answer would be. I've also heard in the connection that when you tell people that about the furloughs, I've heard some Republicans, not all, a few, make the argument that somehow the President is making a decision about furloughs that adversely impact national security, and he's making a mistake when he does that, he or his administration. Or that maybe members of Congress are somehow a part of a decision on furloughs that would adversely impact national security. Well, look, every member of Congress is exposed to intelligence. Every member of Congress has an opportunity to take action when it comes to national security and intelligence. And every member of Congress has a right to say things about decisions that impact national security. But I would say this to my Republican friends. If the charge is that the President and his administration are making decisions about furloughs that somehow compromise our national security, if you're going to assert that, and you're free to do it, it's a free country, but if you're going to assert that, you should have proof, okay? If you're going to make a charge like that against any president, or frankly any member of Congress, Democrat or Republican, you've got to have the proof there. So I'd hope the media, when someone makes that charge against the commander-in-chief, I would hope that that member of Congress would have in their hand the proof, a document, a statement, something that they can put on the table and say that that's the proof. Because if you're going to make a charge which is that serious and in such a grave matter of national security, you've got to prove it. And if you can't prove it, you should keep your mouth shut and not make that charge. So I hope when people say that somehow, you know, this furlough number is, you know, that I've heard people say, oh, well, that's support personnel in the intel community and you really don't need those folks. If you're going to contest the number and say that our national security is okay during a furlough and during a shutdown, you got to prove it. You know, a lot of things people say in Washington that are part of the political debate. But if you're going to accuse someone of taking an action that undermines national security, I think you should have to prove it. So, and why do I say that? Well, I spent 6.5 years on the Foreign Relations Committee, and I've traveled to the Middle East several times, been to Pakistan 3 times, Afghanistan 3 times, Iraq twice, the Middle East several times. So in both of those regions of the world where our national security interests are directly at stake, we have personnel, either uniformed or diplomatic personnel in those areas. I've seen directly how much at risk people can be in those postings, in embassies, in consulates, and how dependent they are, not just on having sometimes literally Marines or soldiers to protect the embassy or a consulate, but how dependent they are on good intelligence. So there are a lot of reasons to open up the government. There are a lot of reasons for the House to vote on this today and open up the government, but there are few that are as compelling as national security and intelligence. Okay, I know I've gone over a little bit. Let me just quickly go through a list of impacts here that the sequesters or the shutdown is having. We know that the shutdown has an impact on small business. Why do we know that? Well, the SBA on a weekly basis provides help to lots of businesses, small businesses across the country, and we know that more than 1,000 businesses per week could see their critical financial support deferred until the government opens up again. So bad for small business to shut the government down. A shutdown would end nutrition support for pregnant women and children. If the government shuts down the Women, Infants, and Children's program, we hear the acronym WIC all the time, but that's Women, Infants, and Children, a great program that if in the event of a shutdown that we're living through right now, that WIC would only be able to continue serving participants for 1 week. So we're in day 2 of the shutdown. So after 1 week, they would have to stop serving participants. What are the numbers here? Here are the basic numbers. In fiscal year 2012, the average monthly participation totaled more than 8.9 million people. Of that 8.9, 4.7 million are children and 2.1 million are infants. So another good reason to pass this bill in the House today with a quick vote, and it would be overwhelmingly bipartisan, is in addition to national security and intelligence, is to make sure that the WIC program can serve people that need it. A government shutdown would compromise public health. Why do I say that? Well, in a shutdown, 70% of NIH employees would be furloughed. This is the National Institutes of Health, okay, that do research on all kinds of diseases and ailments. It's the envy of the world. No other country in the world has anything anywhere near equivalent to the National Institutes of Health. But a shutdown will lead to furloughing of 70% of their employees, and that's another reason. We heard on the news this morning lots of reporting about the Centers for Disease Control. That also is adversely affected in this shutdown. A shutdown compromises school readiness for young children. A government shutdown delays funding for 22 Head Start providers across the country, jeopardizing early childhood education and care for the 18,000 children and families those programs serve. So you're talking about 22 providers for Head Start not being able to provide services for 18,000 children and families. And finally, a shutdown endangers benefits owed to our veterans. The Veterans Administration will run out of money to pay mandatory benefits for existing beneficiaries by the end of this month. Okay? So I know we've heard people saying, well, this check or that check will not be stopped, but ultimately there's going to be a direct impact if the shutdown continues. So I would say to our friends in the House that they can take action right now to prevent this from happening. And how do they do that? Well, it's very simple. All they need to do is to take the bill that's sitting there right now and put it on the floor. A lot of people can vote against it, but the vote for that would be overwhelming. So if Speaker Boehner puts that on the floor today or tonight or tomorrow, he should do it today or tonight, we can be beyond this. According to a new report in the National Review, there are potentially more than 100 House Republicans that would be open to a so-called clean CR. When you hear that, that's what this is. This bill is a clean bill to fund the government. It doesn't have anything attached to it. And by the way, it includes the $70 billion compromise that Democrats have already agreed to by reducing the overall cost of the funding the government. So I'd hope that we could end the shutdown today by having the House adopt this legislation. I'd urge the Speaker to put the bill on the floor for a vote in the House today. Madam President, I want to just conclude with some remarks that are separate, but they are related to the shutdown, but they're also related, unfortunately, to a lot of other budget items. And I'll do this quickly, but I meant to do it the other day, and I wanted to make sure that I put this on the record today. We know that in addition to everything I talked about during the shutdown, over 35,000 correctional officers in our federal prisons report to work not knowing when they'll receive their next paycheck. These are officers that put their lives at risk every day and deserve to know when they'll be paid. During the last shutdown in the mid-90s, some guards went over a month without being paid. These men and women are literally putting their lives on the line every day. Yesterday, I was supposed to be at an event with a number of families who have been directly impacted by the violence that is perpetrated against corrections officers, but I couldn't be there because it was at the same time as our 9:30 vote on the budget and trying to prevent a shutdown, and or I guess at that point trying to reverse the shutdown. I was supposed to meet with Don and Jean Williams, they're the parents of Eric Williams, who lost his life as a corrections officer. Officer Williams lost his life performing his duties at the United States Penitentiary in northeastern Pennsylvania, my home area, and I was able to meet his parents briefly at his viewing. That is real life for the Williams family. But unfortunately, that was not the only family represented at the event yesterday. There were several other families that had lost loved ones in that way. And I'm not sure I had a full appreciation for this before I was elected to the United States Senate. We have corrections officers in Pennsylvania in our state system, and I had some exposure to their work. But it wasn't until I spent a lot of time talking to corrections officers at the federal level that I learned the gravity of this problem. It is a problem with multiple elements to it. One, of course, is just an erosion of support for corrections officers over time, so that over time the ratio of one corrections officer to inmate has grown to say they have grown to dangerous proportions is an understatement. One of the reasons why Officer Williams lost his life is because often these officers are in situations where they are outnumbered, sometimes by hundreds, of inmates, and they, of course, can't carry a weapon. So the tragedy that Officer Eric Williams suffered and the tragedy that others have suffered serves as a stark reminder of the risks that corrections officers and staff face every day. So budget cuts over time, plus across-the-board cuts from sequestration, plus a shutdown, leads to a very dangerous situation for corrections officers, and we need to address their concerns and these issues as part of this overall debate about the budget. So, Madam President, I'll conclude there, but again reiterate that I hope the House will take up the bill that can end this crisis and open up the government. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.